You see, it's much smaller, isn't it? I mean, it was the same.
Life can pass by many milestones. My own is no exception.
For years, the Queen's silence after Diana's tragic passing baffled millions. But now, rumored diary pages may finally reveal the truth, and it's nothing like we imagined. What really happened behind palace walls? Stick around, because this might change everything. Subscribe now so you don't miss what's next. The morning began like any other, but within hours, everything had changed. News swept across the globe. Something had happened in Paris, and the headlines confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Across the United Kingdom, the atmosphere shifted. The streets turned quiet. People stood together without speaking, united by one shared feeling. Bouquets lined the gates of Buckingham Palace. Candles flickered in the rain. Strangers wept in public, unashamed, overwhelmed. For many, it felt like losing a family member. But one person remained silent, the Queen. As the entire country waited to hear from her, nothing came.
The blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
No address, no statement, not even a brief message. Day after day, the silence grew louder. People were asking, why? And more importantly, what was really going on behind the palace walls? While London mourned in the open, Queen Elizabeth was hundreds of miles away in Scotland, at Balmoral Castle. She was there with her family, but she wasn't alone in her grief. 2 young boys had just lost their mother. Prince William was only 15. Prince Harry, just 12. The Queen chose to stay with them, not in public, but in private. Inside Balmoral, the world's most powerful woman wasn't wearing a crown. She was playing the role of grandmother, and that meant keeping the cameras away. No news crews, no interviews, no distractions. Outside, people wondered if she was ignoring the moment.
Each beforehand. And as you will imagine, his views have been expressed.
But inside those stone walls, a family was trying to hold itself together. It wasn't silence out of neglect. It was silence born from protection. At first, the public was too stunned to speak. But as hours turned into days, something changed. The piles of flowers at Buckingham Palace grew taller. So did the frustration. Radio presenters began to say what others had only whispered. Why haven't we heard from her? Headlines grew sharper. Signs appeared in the crowd. Where is our Queen? Speak to us, ma'am. The mood was shifting. What started as quiet sorrow was becoming tension. People didn't just want a monarch. They wanted a connection. And they weren't getting it. Even those who had supported the royal family for decades were now asking questions. The silence was creating a divide. The Queen's decision to stay quiet was beginning to look less like dignity and more like distance.
I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
Then, something changed. 7 days after the news first broke, Queen Elizabeth finally returned to London. She stepped outside the gates of Buckingham Palace, standing before a sea of flowers, cards, and faces filled with emotion. She didn't say a word, but just by being there, everything shifted. She studied the notes, the photographs, the pain etched into every gift left behind. And in that quiet moment, her presence spoke volumes. Later that evening, the Queen appeared on television. Dressed in black, standing in a simple room at Buckingham Palace, she spoke in a voice that was steady, but softer than most had ever heard. She described Diana as an extraordinary person. She spoke of her love for her grandsons. And most importantly, she spoke not just as a monarch, but as a grandmother.
The debate concentrating on what we need to give up, what we can't do, which is very negative. And all of us,
That brief address was enough to start easing the national heartbreak. But what we didn't know at the time was that this moment almost didn't happen. Behind the scenes, there were concerns. The Queen wasn't sure if speaking publicly was the right decision, not because she didn't care, but because she wasn't sure how to do it without losing composure. According to those close to her, Prime Minister Tony Blair and senior advisors spent hours persuading her. They believed the monarchy's future was on the line. The Queen, however, was still thinking about her family first. To her, leadership meant staying calm, even when the world was falling apart. It was how she had been trained. But this time, the world didn't want calm. It wanted connection. And finally, she agreed. But even then, her full truth didn't appear on the screen. It showed up somewhere else entirely, tucked away in a quiet letter. 6 days after the funeral, the Queen wrote a letter, not to the public, not to the press, but to one of her closest confidants, a woman she had trusted for decades.
Group of youngsters who were left behind. I suspect there was an argument about who got the rocking horse.
The letter was brief, typed, but with a small handwritten note at the bottom. She described the past week in one simple phrase: a very bad experience. That may sound understated, but coming from someone who rarely let emotion show, those words carried deep weight. She praised William and Harry for their strength. She wrote that she was proud of them. The emotion she hadn't shown on television? It was all there, quiet, personal, real, personal. This letter, never meant for public view, gave us a glimpse into the Queen's heart and helped us understand why she chose to stay quiet. To understand her silence, we need to understand how she was raised. From a young age, Queen Elizabeth was taught to put duty above all else. She watched her father, King George VI, lead with dignity. In public, he appeared composed. Behind the scenes, he often struggled, but he never let the world see it. That became her example. Strength was defined by stillness. Emotion was private. And when you're carrying the weight of a nation, you don't cry, you carry on. So when the world was mourning, the Queen didn't react the way people expected. Because for her, to grieve in public wasn't strength, it was vulnerability. And she'd never been taught how to show that. But this time, the world wasn't asking for a symbol. They were asking for a person. Years later, a quiet discovery would add even more depth to the story.
Should expect to be free from the scrutiny of those who give it their loyalty.
After the Queen's passing, some of her private diaries began to surface. They weren't long or dramatic. In fact, she often wrote for just 10 or 15 minutes a day. But they were honest. Among short entries about holidays and ceremonies were deeply personal notes, reflections about her family, private thoughts on moments that had changed her forever. And one event came up more than once, that week in 1997. She often referred to it with the same phrase from her letter, a very bad experience. Each time she used that same wording. And sometimes she added something she rarely used, a small exclamation mark. For someone so careful with words, that tiny symbol said more than paragraphs ever could. Something shifted after that week. The Queen began to appear more present, not just as a figurehead, but as a human being. She made more personal visits. Her speeches felt warmer, less formal, more real.
85 to 90% in control of what goes on in order to be competitive.
The royal household also began to evolve. Public statements were issued faster. Protocols became more flexible. The monarchy, so steeped in tradition, began to adapt to the emotions of the people it served. And slowly, that gap between crown and country began to close. People noticed. And more importantly, they appreciated it. As time passed, the Queen's silence in those 7 days didn't just become a footnote. It became a defining moment in modern royal history. It was a turning point, not only for the monarchy, but for the public's relationship with it. For decades, Queen Elizabeth had represented stability. She was the symbol of continuity through war, political change, and social shifts. But in that week, when silence filled the space where comfort was expected, the public saw something they hadn't before: distance, and it hurt. Still, history is rarely simple.
Nations come together in common cause. There is always room for hope.
Yes, the Queen stayed silent. But through letters, diary entries, and quiet moments, we've come to understand that her silence wasn't about detachment. It was about fear of saying the wrong thing, about protecting 2 boys, about believing, as she always had, that her role was to remain. But the world had shifted under her feet. The people didn't want tradition. They wanted emotion. They didn't want royalty. They wanted realness. They didn't want strength masked by silence. They wanted a voice that echoed their pain. And to her credit, the Queen adjusted. Her later years showed that she took the lessons of 1997 to heart. From then on, she moved with more emotional awareness. When tragedy struck the country again, whether it was a natural disaster or national sorrow, she was quick to address it. And this time with more warmth, more openness. That one week rewrote how the Crown communicated.
Who have lost loved ones. We feel their absence at every familiar turn.
And while many remember the Queen for her unwavering sense of duty, an increasing number now see her as someone who learned to grow, even after decades on the throne. That's rare. She never publicly apologized for that silence, but maybe she didn't have to. Her actions spoke louder. The empathy she showed in later years was her quiet answer to the questions raised in 1997. But even now, the debate continues. Some believe her delay was a mistake, one that left a scar. Others believe it was necessary, that family must come first, no matter the role or title. And maybe both are true. Maybe that week wasn't about choosing between crown and connection, but about learning how to hold both at once. Because at the end of the day, even monarchs are human. They feel. They falter. They wrestle with impossible choices, just like the rest of us. It's easy to look back and judge a decision, but it's harder to imagine what it feels like in that moment, with the eyes of the world watching and 2 grieving grandsons sitting beside you at the table. Let us know in the comments, was her silence a strength or a mistake? And if you want to uncover more royal secrets and rare stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.